The silence of deep space surrounded the exploration ship. New Horizon as it drifted through the darkness near the Kepler 442 system. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, his coffee growing cold in his hands as he stared at the massive shape floating in the void ahead of them. The ship was enormous, easily 3 times the size of his own vessel, and it was completely dark. "How long has it been out here?" Morrison asked his science officer, Dr. Nathan Price, who was hunched over his scanner readings. "Based on the metal decay and radiation signatures, I'd say about 150 years. "Maybe more," Price replied without looking up. "But Jake, you need to see this. The ship's registry is coming through now." Morrison walked over to Price's station and looked at the screen. The words made his blood run cold. Liberty's Edge. He knew that name from the history books. Every spacefaring human knew that name. "That's impossible," Morrison whispered. "The Liberty's Edge was destroyed during the final battle of the Centauri War. There were no survivors." "Well, it's right there in front of us," said Lieutenant Commander Lisa Carter, the ship's medical officer, as she joined them on the bridge. "And it's not destroyed. Damaged, yes, but not destroyed." Morrison turned to his communications officer. "Try to raise them on all frequencies. If anyone's alive over there, we need to know." For 10 minutes, they sent signals across every channel they had. Nothing came back but static and the empty hum of space. The Liberty's Edge remained silent, a ghost ship from humanity's bloodiest. "War, sir," called out Chief Petty Officer Ryan Adams from the engineering station. "I'm picking up some very faint power readings from that ship." "Not much, but something's still running over there." Morrison made his decision quickly. "Prepare. A boarding party. Carter, Adams, you're with me. Price, you stay here and monitor everything. If something goes wrong, get us out of here fast." "Jake, this could be dangerous," Price warned. "We don't know what's over there." The Liberty's Edge was reported lost fighting aliens. "What if some of those things are still on board?" "Then we'll deal with it," Morrison replied. "But if there's even a chance that someone survived 150 years on that ship, we have to try to help them." An hour later, Morrison, Carter, and Adams floated through the airlock connecting their ship to the Liberty's Edge. The ancient battleship's corridors were dark and cold, lit only by the emergency lights on their suits. Their footsteps echoed strangely in the thin atmosphere that still remained in some sections of the ship. "The air is breathable, but barely," Carter reported, checking her readings. "Oxygen levels are low, but not deadly. Someone could survive in here for a while if they had to." They moved slowly through the ship, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The Liberty's Edge had been a beautiful ship once, Morrison could tell. Even damaged and abandoned, it had the clean lines and efficient design that marked the best of human engineering. But now it was a tomb filled with empty corridors and silent rooms. "Over here," Adams called from ahead. "I think I found something." They followed his voice to what looked like the ship's medical bay. The room was larger than the medical facilities on Morrison's ship, with several beds and a lot of equipment that looked very advanced for 150-year-old technology. But what caught their attention immediately was the soft blue glow coming from the far corner of the room. "Is that what I think it is?" Carter asked, moving toward the light. Morrison followed her and felt his heart skip a beat. In the corner of the medical bay was a Cryo-Pod, and it was still running. The blue glow came from the status lights on its control panel, and through the clear cover they could see someone inside. "My God," Carter whispered. "There's actually someone in there." Morrison knelt down next to the pod and looked at the person inside. It was a woman, and she was wearing some kind of military armor that looked much more advanced than anything he'd ever seen. The armor was dark green with silver highlights, and even through the Cryo-Pod's cover, he could see that it was in perfect condition. "Check the pod systems," Morrison told Carter. "Is she alive?" Carter ran her medical scanner over the pod and frowned at the readings. "This is impossible, Jake. According to this, she's not only alive, she's in perfect health. But she's been in there for 150 years. That should be impossible with this old technology." Adams was examining the pod's control panel. Captain, you need to see this. The power readings from this pod are off the charts, and look at this. He pointed to a small display on the pod's side. The armor she's wearing, it's still powered up. The battery levels are at 90%. That can't be right, Morrison said. Nothing stays powered for 150 years. Sir, Carter said, her voice tight with excitement and fear. I'm reading her vital signs through the pod systems. She's not just alive, she's stable. Her heart rate, brain activity, everything looks like. She just went into cryo sleep yesterday. And there's something else. The pod's records show her name as Major Elena Brooks, Special Forces, assigned to the 3rd Expeditionary Unit. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. The 3rd Expeditionary Unit had been wiped out during the Battle of Haven Prime, one of the worst defeats in human history. No one from that unit had ever been found. What do the medical readings tell us about bringing her out of cryosleep? Morrison asked. Carter studied her scanner for a long moment. Honestly, Jake, she looks like she could wake up right now with no problems. But this technology is 150 years old. Our equipment might not be compatible with her pod systems. We could kill her trying to wake her up. And if we leave her here, she'd die anyway when the pod's power finally runs out. Morrison pointed out. Adams was still examining the pod systems. Captain, there's something very strange about this armor she's wearing. My readings show that it's not just powered up, it's actually warm. Like body temperature warm, that's not possible if she's been in cryosleep. Morrison made his decision. We're taking her back to our ship. Adams, can you disconnect the pod safely? I think so. Sir, the pod has its own power supply, and it looks like it's designed to be moved. Give me 20 minutes to figure out the connections. While Adams worked on the pod, Morrison and Carter explored the rest of the medical bay. They found records that confirmed what they already suspected. The Liberty's Edge had been lost during the final phase of the Centauri War, fighting against an alien enemy that humanity had barely managed to defeat. But there was no record of how Major Elena Brooks had ended up in the Cryo-Pod, or why her unit's files were classified at levels that Morrison had never seen before. Jake, Carter said, reading through the medical files. According to these records, Major Brooks wasn't injured when she went into the pod. She was in perfect health, so why was she put in cryosleep? Maybe she was the only survivor, and they put her under to wait for rescue, Morrison suggested. But then why didn't they put out a distress signal? And why are all her unit's files classified? Morrison didn't have an answer for that. All he knew was that they had found something impossible, a woman who had been asleep for 150 years, wearing armor that was still warm from a battle that had ended when his grandfather was a child. Pod's ready to move, sir, Adams reported. But I have to warn you, some of these readings don't make sense. It's like the pod exists in its own little bubble of time or something. Morrison nodded grimly. Let's get her back to our ship. Whatever's going on here, we'll figure it out once she's safe. As they carefully moved the Cryo-Pod through the dark corridors of the Liberty's Edge, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to wake up more than just one sleeping soldier. They were about to wake up secrets that had been buried for 150 years, and he wasn't sure humanity was ready for what they might find. The medical bay of the New Horizon hummed with activity as Dr. Lisa Carter worked to connect the ancient cryopod to their ship's systems. The pod sat in the center of the room, its blue lights still glowing softly, the woman inside looking as peaceful as if she had just fallen asleep. Power levels are stable, reported Chief Adams from his position at the control panel. But I'm still getting those strange readings from her armor. It's like it has its own power source that doesn't follow normal physics. Captain Morrison stood nearby, watching the process with growing concern. How long until we can safely wake her up? Another hour, maybe 2, Carter replied, not looking up from her work. I want to make sure our systems are completely compatible with the pod's revival sequence. One mistake, and we could cause brain damage or worse. Morrison nodded and turned to the communications panel. Price, any word from command about our situation? Dr. Price's voice crackled through the speakers from the bridge. I sent our report about finding the Liberty's Edge, but we're too far out for real-time communication. It'll be at least 6 hours before we get a response. Keep monitoring our position. I don't want any surprises while we're dealing with this. 2 hours later, Carter stepped back from the Cryo-Pod with a satisfied expression. We're ready. All systems are green. The revival process should take about 20 minutes once we start it. Do it, Morrison ordered. Carter pressed a series of buttons on the control panel, and the pod's blue lights began to pulse faster. Inside, they could see the woman's body beginning to stir slightly as the cryochemicals were slowly filtered from her system. Heart rate increasing, Carter reported. Brain activity is rising to normal levels. Everything looks good so far. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The woman's eyes began to flutter, and her breathing became more regular. At exactly 20 minutes, the pod's cover slid open with a soft hiss of escaping air. The woman's eyes snapped open, and she sat up so fast that Morrison took a step back. Her hand immediately went to her side, clearly reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Her eyes were sharp and alert, scanning the room with the trained gaze of a soldier. "Where am I?" she demanded, her voice strong despite just waking up from 150 years of sleep. "Where's my squad? What happened to Lieutenant Parker?" "Major Brooks," Morrison said calmly, keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. "You're safe. You're aboard the exploration ship New Horizon. I'm Captain Jake Morrison." Elena Brooks swung her legs over the side of the pod and stood up, her movements fluid and controlled. The armor she wore made no sound as she moved, and Morrison noticed that it seemed to adjust itself to her posture automatically. "Exploration ship?" Elena's eyes narrowed. "What's your military designation, Captain, and why aren't you in proper uniform?" "Major, I need you to sit down," Carter said gently, approaching with a medical scanner. "You've been in cryosleep for a very long time. Your body needs time to adjust." "I don't need to adjust to anything," Elena snapped. "I need to get back to my unit. We were in the middle of a battle. My soldiers are depending on me." Morrison exchanged a look with Carter. This was going to be harder than they thought. "Major." "Brooks, what's the last thing you remember?" Morrison asked. Elena's expression became distant for a moment. "We were fighting the Devourers on Haven Prime. Ugly things like giant spiders with too many teeth. They'd overrun the eastern settlements, and we were ordered to hold the line at Firebase Delta while the civilians evacuated. I remember the explosions, the screaming, my squad taking heavy casualties. Then ... double quotes." She paused, her face troubled. "Then nothing. I woke up here." "Major, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to hear," Morrison said gently. "The battle you're talking about, the Centauri War, it ended 150 years ago. You've been in that Cryo-Pod for a century and a half." Elena stared at him for a long moment, then laughed. "That's impossible. I was just fighting yesterday. Look at my armor." She gestured to the advanced suit she wore. "The power cells are still active. If I'd been asleep for 150 years, everything would be dead." "That's what we can't figure out," Adams admitted. "Your armor shouldn't be working, but it is. And it's not just working, it's working perfectly." "You're lying," Elena said flatly. "This is some kind of test, or maybe I'm a prisoner. Did the Devourers capture me? Are you working with them?" Morrison held up his hands. "Major, I understand this is difficult to believe, but I can prove it to you. Adams, bring up the historical records on the main screen." The wall display activated, showing news footage from the end of the Centauri War. Elena watched in growing shock as the narrator described the final victory over the Devourers, the casualty lists, and the peace treaty that had been signed in 2387. "That's impossible," Elena whispered. "The war can't be over. We were losing." "The Devourers were winning. Humanity rallied," Morrison explained. "The sacrifice of units like yours gave us time to develop new weapons, new strategies. The war ended with complete victory for human forces. The Devourers were wiped out." Carter stepped forward with her scanner. "Major, I'd like to run some medical tests." Your body shows signs of temporal displacement. It's like you exist slightly out of phase with normal time. Temporal displacement? Elena's training kicked in, and she began to analyze the situation more carefully. That's theoretical science, the kind of thing they were working on in the classified labs. What classified labs? Morrison asked. Elena hesitated, clearly debating how much to reveal. I can't discuss classified operations with civilians. We're not civilians, Morrison said. We're human space fleet personnel. And if you've been asleep for 150 years, those classifications have probably expired. Elena studied Morrison's face, looking for signs of deception. Finally, she spoke. Project Lazarus. They were working on ways to keep soldiers alive in impossible situations. Something about existing in multiple time streams simultaneously? My unit was selected for the first field tests. What kind of field tests? Carter asked. I don't know all the details. They gave us new armor, ran us through some kind of energy field that made us feel strange for days. They said it would help us survive anything, that we'd be able to keep fighting even if we were killed. Adams looked up from his scanner readings. Captain, I'm detecting some very unusual energy patterns from the Major's armor. It's like it's connected to something that's not entirely in our dimension. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. Major, you said you remember fighting the Devourers. What if I told you that according to our instruments, your armor is still connected to that battle? Elena's face went pale. What do you mean? The armor is still warm, still powered, still getting energy from somewhere. What if that somewhere is the battle you remember? What if part of you is still fighting on Haven Prime? Elena sat down heavily on the edge of the medical bed. That would mean the battle isn't over. Part of me is still there, still fighting. And if that's true, Morrison continued, then the Devourers might not be as extinct as we thought. Carter's medical scanner began beeping frantically. Captain, I'm reading massive energy spikes from the Major's armor. Something's happening. Elena's armor began to glow with a soft green light as she gasped as images flashed through her mind. I can see them, she whispered. My squad, they're still fighting. Lieutenant Parker is calling for backup, but there's no one left to send. Major, try to stay calm, Carter urged. Your vital signs are spiking? They're dying, Elena said, her voice filled with anguish. They're dying over and over again, and I can't help them because I'm here. Morrison made a decision. Major, we need to understand what's happening to you. Will you work with us to figure this out? Elena looked up at him, her eyes filled with pain and determination. If there's a chance my squad is still alive somewhere, then yes. I'll do whatever it takes. Good, but first, you need to understand. What's happened to the world while you were asleep? Humanity has changed, grown stronger. The colonies you died defending are now thriving worlds with billions of people. Your sacrifice wasn't in vain. Elena absorbed this information, her soldier's mind processing the implications. Show me what humanity has become. Morrison nodded to Adams, who began bringing up displays showing the current state of human civilization. Elena watched in amazement as she saw the vast fleets, the terraformed worlds, the technological advances that had been made in the 150 years since her battle. We're not the same species you knew, Morrison said softly. We're stronger, more united, more capable. But we may need your knowledge to face a threat we thought was extinct. Elena stood up, her armor's glow stabilizing. Then let's get to work, Captain. If the Devourers are still out there, humanity needs to be ready. As she spoke, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Dr. Price's voice came over the intercom, tight with fear. Captain, you need to get to the bridge immediately. We're detecting ships approaching our position, and they don't match any known human designs. Captain Morrison ran toward the bridge with Elena Brooks close behind him, her armor making no sound as she moved. Dr. Carter and Chief Adams followed, all of them trying to understand what was happening to their ship. Report, Morrison called. Out as he entered the bridge. Dr. Price looked up from his station, his face pale with worry. 3 ships, Captain. They appeared out of nowhere about 5 minutes ago. They're not responding to our communications, and their design doesn't match anything in our databases. Morrison looked at the main screen and felt his blood turn cold. The ships were dark and angular, with surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved in a way that reminded him of hunting animals circling the new horizon, like predators sizing up their prey. "Those are devourer ships," Elena said quietly from behind him. Everyone on the bridge turned to look at her. Morrison saw the recognition in her eyes, along with something that looked like fear. "That's impossible." Price said the devourers were wiped out 150 years ago. "Every history book says so." "History books can be wrong," Elena replied, her hand moving instinctively to where her weapons should be. "Those are definitely devourer scout ships, but they're different from the ones we fought. These look more advanced." Morrison turned to his communications officer. "Any response to our signals?" "Nothing, sir. They're just sitting there, watching us." Elena moved to the sensor station and began studying the readings. Her armor system seemed to interface with the ship's computers automatically, displaying information in ways that surprised even Adams. "Captain, your sensors are more advanced than anything we had during the war, but they're not designed to detect devourer technology." "May I?" Elena gestured toward the controls. Morrison nodded, and Elena's hands moved over the console with practiced ease. Her armor systems connected to the ship's sensors, and suddenly the display showed much more detail about the alien ships. "They're not entirely in our dimension," Elena explained. "The devourers learned to phase between different layers of reality. That's how they could appear and disappear so quickly during battles. But these ships are doing something I've never seen before. They're existing in multiple dimensions at the same time." "How is that possible?" Carter asked. "I don't know. During the war, they could only phase for short periods. This is something new." As they watched, one of the alien ships began to move closer to the new horizon. It didn't accelerate the way normal ships did. Instead, it seemed to slide through space, sometimes appearing solid and sometimes becoming translucent. "They're scanning us," Elena said, reading the displays. "And they're particularly interested in me." "The readings are focused on the medical bay where my Cryo-Pod was." Morrison made a decision. "All hands, battle stations. Raise shields and prepare weapons." "Captain," Elena said urgently, "your weapons won't work against them. Not the way they are now. The devourers have learned to exist between dimensions. Regular energy weapons will pass right through them." "Then how do we fight them?" Before Elena could answer, strange things began happening throughout the ship. Lights flickered in patterns that seemed almost like communication. Computer screens displayed images that weren't in their databases. And crew members throughout the ship began reporting the same thing. They were having dreams while awake, visions of battles they had never fought. "What's happening to my crew?" Morrison demanded. Elena's face was grim. "The devourers are trying to find the source of the temporal disturbance, me. They can sense that I'm connected to their original timeline, and they're using that connection to probe your ship." Carter's medical scanner was going crazy as she pointed it at Elena. "Major, your energy readings are off the charts. It's like you're a beacon broadcasting across multiple dimensions." "That's exactly what I am," Elena said. "Project Lazarus didn't just put me in a Cryo-Pod. It anchored my consciousness to a specific point in time while allowing my body to exist in the present. I'm literally living in two times at once." Adams looked up from his engineering station. "Captain, I'm detecting massive power fluctuations throughout the ship. It's like reality itself is becoming unstable around us." On the main screen, the three devourer ships were now moving in a complex pattern around the new horizon. As they moved, space itself seemed to ripple and bend around them. "They're creating a temporal bubble," Elena explained. "They're trying to pull us into the same timeline where the original battle is still happening. Can they do that?" Morrison asked. "I don't know. The devourers we fought 150 years ago couldn't do anything like this. But these ones have had time to evolve, to learn. They've been studying the temporal technology from Project Lazarus." Suddenly, Elena gasped and grabbed the edge of the console for support. Her armor began glowing brighter, and her eyes took on a distant look. "I can see it," she whispered. "The battle on Haven Prime, it's still happening. Lieutenant Parker and Sergeant Davis are trapped in a building surrounded by devourers. They've been fighting the same battle over and over for 150 years, never knowing that time isn't moving forward for them." "How is that possible?" Carter asked, her medical training, making her focus on the impossible biology of the situation. "The Devourers didn't just want to kill us," Elena explained. Her voice strained as she tried to exist in both timelines simultaneously. "They wanted to study us, to understand how humans could be so effective against them. So they trapped my squad in a time loop, forcing us to fight the same battle repeatedly so they could analyze our tactics." Morrison felt sick. "Your entire unit has been fighting and dying over and over again for 150 years? Not dying. That's the cruel part. The temporal loop resets everything just before death, so we experience the fear and pain of dying without ever actually escaping into death. We're trapped in an eternal moment of battle." The ship shuddered as one of the Devourer vessels moved closer. Through the viewports, the crew could see that space around them was beginning to change. Stars were shifting position, and the familiar background of the galaxy was being replaced by something else. "They're pulling us into the loop," Elena said. "If they succeed, your entire crew will be trapped in the same eternal battle that my squad has been fighting." "How do we stop them?" Morrison asked. Elena's armor was now glowing so brightly that it was hard to look at her directly. "There's only one way. I have to go back." "Go back where?" "To the original timeline? To the battle on Haven Prime. If I can break the temporal loop from the inside, it might free my squad and prevent the Devourers from trapping you as well." Carter stepped forward. "That's suicide. If you go back to that timeline, you'll be trapped." "In the same loop as your squad?" "Maybe, or maybe the fact that I've existed outside the loop for 150 years will give me the knowledge I need to break it." The ship shuddered again, more violently this time. Outside, the Devourer ships were moving faster, their dimensional phasing, creating ripples in space that were pulling the new horizon towards something that looked like a tear in reality itself. "Captain," Price called out, "our instruments are showing impossible readings. According to the sensors, we're beginning to exist in multiple time periods simultaneously." Morrison looked around his bridge. Several of his crew members were staring off into space, their eyes unfocused. When he called their names, they didn't respond. They were beginning to experience the same temporal displacement that Elena lived with constantly. "We're running out of time," Elena said. "The longer we stay here, the more your crew will be pulled into the time loop. I have to make a choice now." "Wait," Adams called out from his station. "Major, what if we don't send you back alone? What if we use our ship's systems to amplify whatever connection you have to the original timeline? Maybe we can break the loop from here." Elena shook her head. "Your technology isn't designed for temporal warfare. The attempt could destroy your ship and everyone on it. And if we do nothing, we'll all be trapped in an eternal battle anyway." Morrison pointed out. Elena looked around the bridge at the crew members who were trying to help her, people who had found her after 150 years and brought her back to life. She had spent so long focused on her duty to her squad that she had forgotten what it meant to be part of a larger community. "There might be another way," she said slowly. "But it's dangerous, and I'll need everyone's help." "What do you need?" Morrison asked. "I need to access the Liberty's Edge's main computer. The Project Lazarus files are still there, and they might contain information about how to reverse the temporal effects. But to get there, we'll have to fly through that dimensional tier the Devourers are creating." Morrison looked at his crew, seeing the determination in their faces despite the fear. "Then that's what we'll do." "Adams, plot a course for the Liberty's Edge. Carter, prepare the medical bay for multiple casualties. Price, try to keep us in this dimension as long as possible." As the new horizon changed course toward the ancient battleship, the Devourer vessels moved to intercept them. The space around both ships began to twist and bend as multiple timelines tried to exist in the same place. Elena stood at the center of the bridge, her armor glowing like a star, serving as an anchor point for the crew's consciousness as they prepared to dive into a battle that had been raging for 150 years. The new horizon shook violently as it approached the dimensional tier surrounding the Liberty's edge. Captain Morrison gripped his chair as reality itself seemed to bend around them. Through the viewports he could see the ancient battleship, flickering between different states of existence, sometimes solid and battle-scarred, sometimes transparent like a ghost. Hull stress is approaching critical levels, Chief Adams reported from his engineering station. The dimensional distortion is trying to tear us apart. Elena Brooks stood in the center of the bridge, her glowing armor serving as the only stable point in the chaos around them. Her eyes were closed, and she was speaking quietly to herself, though Morrison couldn't understand the words. "She's trying to guide us through," Dr. Carter explained, her medical scanner focused on Elena. "Her connection to the original timeline is acting like a navigation beacon." On the main screen, the 3 Devourer ships were moving to intercept them. But as they got closer to the dimensional tier, the alien vessels began to change. They became more solid, more real, and Morrison could see details that hadn't been visible before. "They're not just ships," Dr. Price said with horror. "Look at the hull patterns. Those are living creatures." Morrison looked more closely and realized Price was right. What they had thought were mechanical ships were actually enormous alien beings, dark and twisted with surfaces that pulsed like skin. They moved through space with the fluid grace of sea creatures, but their intent was clearly hostile. "The Devourers evolved," Elena said without opening her eyes. "They're not the same species we fought 150 years ago. They've absorbed the temporal technology from Project Lazarus and used it to change themselves into something new." The first, Devourer creature reached the new horizon and wrapped what looked like tentacles around the ship's hull. Immediately, alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. "They're trying to phase us into their dimension," Adams warned. "Hull integrity is failing in sections 3 through 7. Morrison turned to his weapons officer. "Fire everything we have at that thing." Energy beams lanced out from the New Horizons' weapons, but they passed harmlessly through the Devourer creature. It was existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making it nearly impossible to hit with conventional weapons. "Captain," Elena called out, her voice strained. "Your weapons need to be calibrated to match my armor's frequency. That's the only way to hit them. How do we do that?" Elena opened her eyes, and Morrison saw that they were glowing with the same green light as her armor. "I need direct access to your weapon systems. But if I connect my armor to them, it might overload your entire power grid." Another Devourer creature attached itself to the ship, and more alarms began sounding. Morrison could feel the ship being pulled in different directions as the creatures tried to drag them into the temporal loop. "Do it," Morrison ordered. "Whatever the risk, it's better than being trapped forever." Elena moved to the weapons control station and placed her hands on the console. Her armor systems interfaced with the ship's weapons, and immediately the bridge was filled with crackling energy. Sparks flew from several stations as the ship's power systems struggled to handle the connection. "Weapons are now synchronized with the Major's temporal frequency," the weapons officer reported, "but power levels are fluctuating wildly." "Fire," Morrison commanded. This time, when the energy beams struck the Devourer creatures, they hit solid targets. The aliens released their grip on the ship and retreated, their forms flickering between dimensions as they tried to escape the new weapons. "It's working," Elena said, though the effort was clearly draining her. "But I can't maintain this connection for long. We need to reach the Liberty's edge now." The New Horizon pushed through the dimensional barrier, and suddenly, they were in a different kind of space entirely. The stars were wrong, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. And in the distance, Morrison could see something that made his heart sink. Haven Prime. The colony world was exactly as it had been 150 years ago, under attack by thousands of Devourer creatures. Cities burned in the distance, and the sky was filled with the smoke of battle. But this wasn't a memory or a recording. This was happening right now, in an eternal present where time had stopped moving forward. There, Elena pointed to a section of the planet's surface. Firebase Delta, that's where my squad is trapped. Morrison could see it through the ship's telescopes. A small human outpost surrounded by alien creatures, with tiny figures in military armor fighting desperately against impossible odds. Even from space, he could see the explosions and energy weapons fire as the same battle played out over and over again. How long have they been fighting? Carter asked, her voice filled with horror. Every moment for 150 years, Elena replied. Time resets every 6 hours, just before the base would be completely overrun. They remember fragments of previous loops, but never enough to change the outcome. The Liberty's Edge hung in orbit above the planet, its hull showing the damage from that final battle so long ago. But now Morrison could see that the damage was constantly repairing itself, only to be inflicted again as the temporal loop reset. Getting to the ship won't be easy, Price warned. There are dozens of devourer creatures between us and the Liberty's Edge, and they all know we're here. As if responding to his words, the alien creatures in the area began moving toward the new horizon. These devourers were different from the ones they had just fought. They looked more like the creatures from Elena's memories, but there were so many of them that they blocked out the stars. They've had 150 years to breed and multiply in this pocket dimension, Elena explained. And since time resets every 6 hours, they never die permanently. Each loop, they're reborn to fight again. Morrison realized the true horror of the situation. The Devourers hadn't just trapped Elena's squad in a time loop. They had created an entire pocket universe where they could exist forever, constantly growing stronger while studying human tactics and technology. How do we get through them? Morrison asked. Elena's armor was glowing brighter now, and Morrison could see that she was struggling to maintain her connection to both timelines simultaneously. There's something you need to understand about the Devourers. They're not just random monsters. They're intelligent and they learn from every battle. But their intelligence is collective, like a hive mind. What does that mean for us? It means that if we can disrupt their collective consciousness, even temporarily, they'll become confused and disorganized. But to do that, I need to access the Project Lazarus files on the Liberty's Edge. The first wave of devourer creatures reached the new horizon, and the ship shuddered under their impact. These older versions of the aliens were more aggressive than the evolved ones they had fought earlier, attacking with claws and energy weapons that could affect multiple dimensions simultaneously. Shields are failing, Adams reported. Hull breaches on decks 4 and 5. Elena moved her hands over the weapons controls again, but this time the connection was unstable. The strain is too much. I can't maintain the weapons synchronization and navigate us through the dimensional barriers at the same time. Morrison made a decision that surprised even himself. Then we'll do this the old-fashioned way. Price, calculate a ramming course for the Liberty's Edge. Adams, transfer all power to the forward shields and engines. Sir, that's suicide, Price protested. Maybe, but it's better than being trapped here forever. And if Major Brooks is right, our sacrifice might free her squad and prevent these things from escaping into our timeline. Elena looked at Morrison with surprise and gratitude. Captain, you don't have to do this. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is, Morrison replied. The moment we found you, it became our fight. Humanity doesn't abandon its own, no matter how much time has passed. The new horizon accelerated toward the Liberty's Edge, smashing through waves of devourer creatures that tried to block their path. The ship's hull groaned under the impact, and sections began to collapse, but they kept moving forward. 30 seconds to impact. Price announced. Elena moved to the center of the bridge and began removing panels from her armor. When we reach the Liberty's Edge, I need to connect directly to its main computer, but the process will probably kill me. Major, Carter said urgently, there has to be another way. There is, Elena replied, but it requires someone else to take my place as the temporal anchor. Someone willing to exist in multiple timelines simultaneously. Morrison understood immediately. You're talking about one of us. The connection can be transferred, but only voluntarily. Someone would have to choose to take on the burden of existing in both the past and present. The New Horizon struck the Liberty's edge with tremendous force, the two ships becoming locked together in a twisted embrace of metal and energy. Emergency alarms sounded throughout both vessels as the crews struggled to survive the impact. Hull integrity critical, Adams reported. We're losing atmosphere in multiple sections. Elena was already moving toward the airlock that connected the two ships. I'm going to the Liberty's Edge's computer core. Captain, you need to decide quickly if someone is going to take my place. Morrison looked around his bridge at the crew members who had become his family over years of exploration together. He knew what he had to do. Elena Brooks moved through the damaged corridors of the Liberty's Edge, her armor's glow providing the only light in the darkness. The ship felt different now, alive with temporal energy that made the walls shimmer and shift around her. She could hear the sounds of battle echoing from somewhere that wasn't quite real. The voices of her squad calling for backup that would never come. Behind her, she knew Captain Morrison was preparing to take her place as the temporal anchor. The thought of another person suffering what she had endured for 150 years made her move faster through the familiar passages of her old ship. The computer core was exactly where she remembered it, though now it pulsed with strange energy that hadn't been there before. As she approached the main terminal, the Project Lazarus files began displaying automatically, responding to her presence. "Computer, display Project Lazarus master files," she commanded. The screen filled with information that made her heart sink. The project had been more extensive than she had known. Dozens of soldiers from different units had been connected to the temporal network, all of them trapped in various time loops across multiple battlefields. Her squad was just one small part of a much larger experiment. "Display termination protocols," she said, knowing that there had to be a way to end what had been started. The computer hesitated, then displayed a warning. Termination of Project Lazarus will result in the death of all connected subjects. Temporal anchors cannot survive disconnection from the network. Elena felt cold despite her armor's warmth. If she broke the time loop, she would die. And so would Morrison when he took her place. The only way to save her squad was to sacrifice both herself and the captain who had tried to help her. Through her armor's communication system, she could hear what was happening on the New Horizon. Morrison was in the medical bay with Dr. Carter, preparing for the transfer process that would make him the new temporal anchor. "Major Brooks?" Morrison's voice came through clearly. "Have you found the termination protocols?" Elena hesitated before answering. "Yes, Captain. But there's something you need to know. The process will kill both of us. Are you still willing to go through with it?" There was a long pause before Morrison replied. "Yes, if it saves your squad and prevents these creatures from escaping into our timeline, it's worth it." Elena closed her eyes and felt a wave of gratitude and sorrow. Morrison was willing to die for people he had never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. It was the kind of courage that made humanity special, the kind of courage that had won the war against the Devourers 150 years ago. But as she studied the Project Lazarus files more carefully, she began to see something the original scientists had missed. The temporal loops weren't just prisons. They were also sources of incredible energy, drawing power from the repeated moments of time. If that energy could be redirected, it might be possible to do more than just break the loops. "Captain, wait," she called through the communication system. "I think there's another way." Elena's fingers flew over the controls as she accessed deeper levels of the Project Lazarus system. The temporal energy that had been trapping her squad could be used to collapse not just their pocket dimension, but all the pocket dimensions the Devourers had created. It would free every trapped soldier and destroy the alien breeding grounds. At the same time, but it would require someone to stay connected to the network, not as a prisoner, but as a controller. Someone would have to willingly merge with the temporal system and guide its destruction from within. "Major, what are you proposing?" Morrison asked. "I'm going to merge completely with the Project Lazarus network," Elena explained. Not just my consciousness, but my entire being. I'll become part of the system itself, and from there, I can guide the collapse of all the temporal loops simultaneously. That sounds even more dangerous than the original plan. Elena smiled, even though Morrison couldn't see her. Maybe, but it also means you and your crew can survive. And more importantly, it means I can save every soldier who's been trapped, not just my squad. Through the ship's sensors, Elena could see that the Devourer creatures were massing for another attack on both ships. They seemed to sense that something was about to change, and their movements were becoming more frantic and aggressive. "How long do you need?" Morrison asked. "Give me 10 minutes. And, Captain, if this works, the energy release is going to be massive. You need to get your ship clear of the dimensional tier as soon as the process starts." Elena began the merger process, feeling the Project Lazura system reaching into her mind and body. It was painful at first, like being torn apart and rebuilt at the same time. But as the connection deepened, she began to understand the true scope of what the project had created. There were hundreds of temporal loops scattered across the galaxy, each one containing trapped soldiers and growing populations of devourers. The aliens had been using the loops as breeding grounds and training facilities, preparing for a massive invasion of normal spacetime. Elena's awakening had disrupted their plans, but only temporarily. As she merged deeper with the system, Elena found herself existing in multiple places simultaneously. She could see her squad still fighting at Firebase Delta, could feel their exhaustion and desperation. She could also sense the other trapped soldiers, all of them holding the line in battles that had been over for decades. "I can see them all," she whispered, her voice now coming from the ship's communication system rather than her physical body. "Every soldier, every battle. They've been so brave, fighting alone for so long." The merger process was almost complete when Elena sensed something unexpected. The Devourers weren't just using the temporal loops for breeding. They were also trapped by them, unable to escape back to normal spacetime without risking the collapse of their entire network. The loops that had been their advantage had also become their prison. "Beginning collapse sequence now," Elena announced. Her consciousness now spread across hundreds of timelines simultaneously. The Liberty's Edge began to shake as massive amounts of temporal energy coursed through its systems. On the new horizon, Morrison and his crew felt the distortion as reality itself began to change around them. "All power to engines," Morrison ordered. "Get us clear of the dimensional tier." As the new horizon pulled away from the ancient battleship, Elena began the most complex task of her existence. She had to carefully collapse each temporal loop in the correct sequence, ensuring that the trapped soldiers could escape while preventing the Devourers from following them. One by one, the pocket dimensions began to collapse. Elena felt the joy and confusion of soldiers who had been fighting the same battle for decades as they suddenly found themselves free. She guided them toward the collapsing dimensional barriers, helping them escape back to normal space-time. At Firebase Delta, she watched her squad realize that the battle was truly over. Lieutenant Parker and Sergeant Davis looked around in wonder as the Devourer creatures simply vanished, pulled back into the collapsing temporal loops. For the first time in 150 years, the base was quiet, but the process was taking its toll on Elena. Each collapsed loop required enormous amounts of energy, and she could feel herself becoming weaker as the network consumed her essence to power the destruction. "Major, your energy readings are dropping rapidly," Carter's voice came through the communication system. "You're dying." "I know," Elena replied, her voice now coming from speakers throughout both ships. "But it's working. The loops are collapsing and the soldiers are escaping. In a few more minutes, it will all be over." The Devourer creatures, realizing that their carefully constructed network was being destroyed, made a desperate attempt to break free into normal spacetime. But Elena was ready for them. As each group tried to escape, she redirected them into collapsing loops, trapping them in temporal bubbles that would eventually disappear entirely. "The last group of soldiers is free," Elena reported, her voice now barely a whisper. "All the loops are collapsing. The Devourers are trapped in the destruction of their own network." Morrison watched on his screens as the dimensional tier began. To close, the strange, twisted space around them was being replaced by normal stars and familiar constellations. The Liberty's edge was becoming translucent, fading as the temporal energy that had sustained it was finally exhausted. "Elena," Morrison called out. "Can you hear me?" "I'm here, Captain. But not for much longer. The merger process is complete. I'm becoming part of the ship's systems permanently. Is there anything we can do to help you?" Elena's voice carried a note of peace that hadn't been there before. "You've already done everything you could? You found me, you woke me up, and you gave me the chance to save my squad. That's more than I ever hoped for." The Liberty's edge was now almost completely transparent, existing more as a memory than a physical object. But Elena's voice remained strong. "Captain, I need you to do something for me. When you get back to human space, tell them about the soldiers who were trapped in the loops. They've been fighting for decades, holding the line even when no one knew they were there. They deserve to be remembered as heroes." "They will be," Morrison promised, "and so will you." "I'll be here if you ever need me," Elena said. "The ship's systems will remember everything. If humanity ever faces another threat, like the Devourers, the knowledge will be waiting.